In this episode of Landmarks Discovered, we'll be discussing Bethesda-by-the-Sea, built in 1925 by the architectural firm of Hiss and Weeks. This version of Bethesda-by-the-Sea is actually the third iteration of the building. And Katie, can you tell us about the previous two versions of the building?
So the first iteration of Bethesda-by-the-Sea was built in 1889 in the frame vernacular style, which is a local building which is built of local materials by local people. And it was located about a mile north of Bradley Park, close to the Little Red Schoolhouse in the early development of Palm Beach, where things were associated around Lake Worth.
The first version of Bethesda-by-the-Sea is almost completely identical to the Little Red Schoolhouse. And these early pioneer buildings represent a time when the buildings that were being built were primarily to serve functional needs, and aesthetics were something that weren't really taken into consideration. So we can see with the next version of Bethesda-by-the-Sea that there is a lot more attention to detail and making the building aesthetically pleasing.
So the next iteration of Bethesda happens in 1895, which is a year after Henry Flagler builds the Royal Poinciana Hotel in 1894. So we really see this new introduction of this northern style of architecture here. So they built Bethesda 2 just south of Bethesda 1, and they brought in a northern architect, John H. Lee from Troy, New York. And it's really this interesting structure. It's a shingle-style house. It has these Moorish influences, and they were able to have this all-inclusive price from the architect for $13,485, which today translates to just over $400,000. Today, the second iteration of Bethesda is a single-family home, and it was deconsecrated in 1925. The third iteration of Bethesda-by-the-Sea started in 1925, and it took 2 years to complete at the cost of $650,000, which today translates to a little over $9 million. The church is built out of a cast stone material, and at the time only contained one stained glass window. When Bethesda built their third iteration in 1925, they chose to move the location from the north end to really more towards the center of town because the development of the town had really shifted south. And you see this not only in the development of Main Street by Flagler, but really in the development of the Royal Park Addition by Kappy and Dimmick, when we talked about Town Hall in our last episode, but also in the development of Worth Avenue by Addison Meisner. So they really wanted to be centrally located.
So we can really see how the town of Palm Beach has grown and prospered through the three iterations of Bethesda-by-the-Sea. As the town grew and became more prosperous, so did the congregation, and the construction materials and methods reflect that wealth. Hiss and Weeks was an architectural firm based in New York City that was known for its Beaux-Arts training and is responsible for important New York landmarks like the Peninsula Hotel. One of the principals, H. Hobart Weeks, worked for the architectural firm of McKim, Mead, and White.
The architecture of McKim, Mead, and White is often credited with defining Gilded Age America. The parishioners of Bethesda really wanted to hold themselves to this higher standard of building at that time. So they're also building a fireproof building because it's made out of concrete. And they're bringing in a firm from New York who has this connection to Beaux-Arts architecture as well. And even though they're building a different style, they're wanting to connect it to this higher form of architecture.
For the filming of this episode, we were given special access to Bethesda and were given the opportunity to sit down with the Reverend James Harlan.
The imposing Gothic structure in this beautiful setting becomes a place of peace, and it becomes a place that's inviting. Often Gothic churches can be imposing and a little intimidating. And I think this one, particularly because of the gardens and grounds, is a place that invites such peace and reflection from people. One of the important aspects of Gothic architecture is that it invites pilgrimage, a sense of journey. And I like that our grounds here do the same thing. As you walk from County Road through the Garth and back to the Clewett Garden, there's a sense of journey to the sacred and to the spiritual. So the word Bethesda means house of healing. The church started as a resource for spiritual healing for people who came down here from the north. We have our own pool of Bethesda that resides in our garth, in our big courtyard, with a beautiful angel hovering over it, and it's beautifully lit at night. My favorite window is the window over the high altar with this stunning blue color that just glistens as the sun rises in the morning. And that window is also meaningful because it was shipped over from Europe during World War II and shipped on several ships so as to ensure that it would get here safely. All the shipments did arrive safely, and the window is intact. And it's really a gem of stained glass in this country.
And one of the things I was really excited about was the ability to bring in a drone to film some of the incredible iconography that's throughout the church and view it from a different perspective.
Yes, so there's some really interesting shots within the church itself. Within the beams on the roof, there's a wolf carved into the timbering. The clerestory stained glass windows there actually showcase all the iterations of Bethesda being held by the bishops. And at the entrance to the church, you see Christ holding the third iteration of Bethesda, surrounded by the saints.
The building we have is what we have, but we, of course, every church in the 50s added space for Sunday school. It's always a challenge for a church to maintain a building like this. We care a lot about the building, and we work hard to care for it, to preserve it for future generations. It's also a challenge for us because we would love to have larger and different kinds of spaces for meetings and programs, but we use the spaces we have really well and creatively. A lot of the spaces lend themselves to different kinds of programs and uses.
The current campus that we see today was really added onto in the 50s by Barry and Sims Wyeth.
And I thought that was interesting how much research that Jane found during the course of working on the Wyeth book. And I never had any idea how involved he was with the expansion of the church in its current form.
You can see that he added on to the parish hall because really in the 50s for the development of the church, it was about adding on Sunday school space or educational space. And then of course in the 60s, they added on the columbarium, which is the first space where people could be buried in Palm Beach.
And Wyeth and his wife, and also John Volk and his wife, are all buried there.
Yes. It also includes the rectory as well, which is part of the campus, which was built by Wyeth for Edward Jenkins prior to Bethesda being built. When Wyeth did the rectory, it had a very traditional stenciled ceiling in the living room. And in the stencils, it had sketches of snakes. But when it was sold to the rectory in 1929, of course, the snakes were removed because they think that is a bit of an inappropriate iconography for a church. The garden was added in 1931 as a gift from Nellie Clewett, whose parents were one of the founders of the church. It was designed by Walter Thomas of Philadelphia to reflect an Italian influence, and in fact, within the fountain, they utilized local materials such as Meisner tiles. In 1996, Bethesda-by-the-Sea was awarded the Preservation Foundation's highest restoration award, the Ballinger Award. The restoration of Bethesda was unique because it was really about making the building sustainable for being in Palm Beach. So they really focused on hurricane proofing the stained glass, making sure the cast stone wouldn't be eroded by the sea, and they really worked on making sure that the building would last another 100 years. The word landmark usually connotates grand designed buildings, and when the Landmarks Ordinance was passed in 1979, Bethesda-by-the-Sea definitely fit that description. So it's no surprise that it was one of the first buildings landmarked in 1979.
We're thrilled to be a landmarked structure because it recognizes the legacy that we have here and the importance that we have in the community. And for us, the landmark designation is a reminder that we're stewards of this building. It's not just ours to do with what we want. It's ours to care for future generations, just as previous generations enabled us to enjoy it now. One of the things that is important for us is that beauty is one of the ways we experience the divine. Beauty is one of the ways we know that we're loved. And so the beauty of this place, I hope, is a reminder to anyone who sees it, even just driving by, that they're loved and that peace is possible.
Thanks for joining us for this episode on Bethesda by the Sea. On our next episode of Landmarks Discovered, we'll be exploring the work of the architect Maurice Facio. I hope you'll join us.